That was the interesting thing about St. Paul was it was kind of like a misplaced righteous anger. Like we've all found ourselves mad at people or mad at certain situations and stuff and feel like we're in the right.
Yeah.
But then come to find out later on that we aren't. We've all been in that kind of situations. And St. Paul he was a Pharisee,
Okay.
which, a lot of people that read the Bible, they think Pharisee automatically is like a bad thing, but really it was like a political sect,
Yeah.
And he was a Pharisee, and he hinted at his father was a Pharisee
Yeah.
when he was given his pedigree, and I think it was in Galatians.
Yeah.
But he was raised as he was taught the law by Gamaliel,
Mm-hmm.
who was one of the one of the most well-known teachers of Judaic law, back in that time frame. And one of the things that I find really interesting too, as a side note about his teacher, if you read in Acts chapter 5, when St. Peter and I think it was St. John was brought before the Sanhedrin and they were debating back and forth, Gamaliel took a very moderate approach to this, nascent Christianity, and he said, he named all these different other people that came up and rose up against the Romans or rose up against the powers that be and were put down, basically.
Yeah.
And he said, if they're not of God, they'll just die out on their own. But they are of God, we'll be opposing God himself if we oppose it. So I thought it was very interesting. That was his teacher. And yet Paul didn't take that approach. He took the complete opposite. He took the kill them all, let God sort them out approach. He was, he was from Central Asia, what I guess would be modern Turkey nowadays, Tarsus. And he was a Roman citizen too. That's what kind of comes around the end of his life. The Roman citizen part really plays into that.
And he's a very educated man, right? I mean, he's
yes. He was trained in the law. He said, when he was before the Sanhedrin, he was trained in the law, and he said that he himself was a Pharisee, and he kind of played that back and forth off when he first got brought before the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. He played the Pharisees against the Sadducees. It was two dueling factions, and so he recognized it was kind of a rift in the crowd, basically, and he played them against each other. But he was a very educated man. He knew the scriptures well, and that's the thing about him is he had righteous anger, because if you're following this man named Jesus, this rabbi that comes up from Galilee, and if he isn't truly the Son of God, well, then he's the worst of all blasphemers, because he's claiming to be God. So from Paul's point of view, he was suffering from spiritual blindness. So from his point of view, what he was doing was 100% right. And that's why he's such an important character for us to pay attention to, because, like I said, we've all been in situations where we've thought we've been 100% right.
Yeah.
And you're not seeing the whole story.
So, in a way, isn't Paul actually a very powerful man also, for whom it's very difficult to actually make this change from being a man who was a very hardcore Jew to being somebody who's now a nascent Christian? Isn't it more harder for him because he was a very powerful, very influential man?
Right. Yeah, it would be easier. I'd imagine, I don't know personally, but I'd imagine back in that day it would be easier to be a convert from just kind of Roman paganism than it would be if you were a very faithful Jew, because it's a revolutionary idea you're buying into here, that the king, because they worship the God that we worship, but this king of the universe, this God, the creator of the entire universe, became man and was born in this little, shanty town 10 miles south of Jerusalem. So where people lived in caves in Bethlehem. And it would be a tough sell, I think. It would be harder to buy it that's probably why Paul would go around when he would come down to a city, he would go into the synagogue first and preach to the synagogue. And usually he'd win over a few people here and there, but then he'd go out to the Gentiles outside. And it seemed like he had a lot more, a lot better time with the Gentiles than he did with the Jews, because, like I said, I think it would be a hard sell.
So this major turning point in Paul's life, which was his the start of his ministry, was on the road to Damascus. So what exactly is pertinent about this encounter that he had with Christ? Because lots of people have encounters, but then after that they don't have the effect that Paul had in his ministry. So what's so special about Paul's turning point?
Well, Paul seen Jesus, actually seen a physical manifestation of Jesus.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think is so powerful about that too is Jesus said to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?
Yeah.
You know, he didn't say, why are you persecuting my church or my followers or my
Yeah.
people? He said, me. Because when we're baptized into Christ,
Yeah.
one body. And Saul at the time was literally knocked to the ground.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, he gets knocked to blindness too. And he's going into Damascus to take people out as captives, to take them back to Jerusalem. And now he has to be led by the hand, because he's blind, into Damascus. Now he's the one being led by the hand.
Yeah.
And I think it was a really powerful point in his life.
Okay. It also means that Christ actually does not separate his body from his church, right? I mean, he is the church.
Right, yeah. Yeah, because that's what he said. He said, why are you persecuting me?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought that's very powerful. It's a thing that you kind of, I mean, everyone knows the conversion of St. Paul. Everyone knows that story. I think even atheists would know that story. It's a very famous biblical story. But you can gloss over certain things, especially things you've heard so many times. And, you know, I've read that a million times myself, and it really struck me not too long ago, you know, kind of a personal conversion in my life where I've always been a Christian, but I kind of had more of a recommitment.
Yeah.
And it struck me a couple of years ago when I was reading that. I said, why are you persecuting me? Because when we're baptized into Christ, when we're part of the church, we're part of Christ, you know. So that's a really powerful thing.
So this encounter that Paul has, you see the same, like many encounters that he has throughout his ministry later. So many people actually, once they have their first meeting with Christ later on, that encounter kind of peters off, or you know, they don't stay in dialogue with God. So what is exactly Paul doing? I mean, through his ministry that strengthens his dialogue with God, and what can we do similarly to what Paul did?
Well, I think the important thing is it's like the parable Jesus told about the sowing the seeds. You know, the different ground that the seed falls on. If it falls on shallow soil and the sun burns it up, or if it falls in with the weeds.
Yeah.
All these different things, you know. But one of the important things is a lot of people miss it too, because if you read just the Acts account of the conversion of St. Paul, he's knocked off. Well, we think he's knocked off his horse because that's how it's always portrayed in art, but it doesn't actually say horse. He's just knocked to the ground, and he gets led by the hand into the city, and then Ananias comes, and you know, scales fall off his eyes, and he's healed, and he's baptized and repents, and then he had to flee the Jews because he was preaching in the synagogues and stuff. And it said after many days he had to flee. But what a lot of people don't know is because it isn't in the Acts account. But if you read in Galatians, when Paul's kind of given his pedigree and why he should be listened to as an apostle, he tells them about how he went off into Arabia for 3 years and he was taught the gospel by God. You know, I think that's the key thing with Paul's life. At this point, Paul, no longer Saul. That's the key thing with his life is he listened to God. You know, he encountered the gospel. He encountered the person of Jesus, not just the idea of Jesus as some great moral teacher. Or just some rabbi that was, just teaching people out in the wilderness. He encountered the risen Christ. And I think that's really the key there, is we have to encounter the risen Christ in our own life. We have to sit at the feet of Jesus and, really absorb the gospel from him.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's important there, I've noticed, like whenever I've read Paul, is that Paul doesn't just quote scripture. He prays scripture. And, it's kind of different because for me, I would just read all of it, but I wouldn't pray it. But Paul keeps doing that throughout. I mean, in the Acts and even later, he prays scripture all the time instead of just quoting it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, and what he's writing, too, was actually became scripture, too. Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. He's, like I said, he wrote, I don't know, it's 13 or 14 of the 27 books of the New Testament. So that's a lot of writing. And also, there's, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4. There's 3 or 4 books that he references in different places in his letters that he wrote, like my previous letter to you, that we don't actually have. Yeah. So there'd be even more Pauline epistles. Yeah. They were just kind of lost to posterity.
Yeah. So, what exactly about Paul's ministry are like the most highlighted throughout? I mean, if we're telling somebody who's absolutely new to Christianity, what are some of the highlights you can give us about St. Paul's life and his ministry?
Well, he founded churches all over Asia Minor and Greece, I guess what we modern day Greece, Macedonia. He founded churches all over them. He wrote letters to all these churches back and forth. And that's basically where the New Testament, I mean, you got the Gospels, then you got the letters of St. Paul, and then you have several other letters by like Peter and John and Jude and Revelation. But he wrote the bulk of the New Testament. And what he was saying as he was writing it too was it wasn't something that wasn't secondhand knowledge that he had. Like I said, it was received by God. You know, it was a gospel. And he says, as it was handed down to me, and he also gives an account, you know, when we're at Mass and we hear the Eucharistic prayer. That prayer is from 1 Corinthians, you know, on the night he was betrayed. So he recounts all that too. He was known, like I said, St. Thomas Aquinas called him the Apostle, even though he wasn't one of the 12. He wasn't one of the 12 apostles, but the word apostle means sent out, you know, like sent out with a commission to preach the gospel. And Jesus sent him out on a mission. Another thing, too, that I think is interesting about the life of Paul is after his conversion, and he goes away for 3 years, and he comes back, he goes to Jerusalem, and then he had to flee Jerusalem. They put him on a boat and sent him back to Tarsus, Barnabas did. And then it wasn't until the church in Antioch needed someone to teach them. So it doesn't say how long it was. It could have been a year, it could have been a couple of years. But Paul sat and waited until he was called to serve. Like, he waited until he was called into service by the church, you know. And so I think that's a very important thing, too.
I mean, he was beaten, shipwrecked. He had a very...
that comes later. That was before he even started. Once he starts his ministry in Antioch, then he went on at least 3 missionary journeys before his arrest and trial in Rome and everything. And some say, because the book of Acts ends with really no resolution to his trial, because he got arrested and he spent 2 years in prison in Caesarea. And then he got sent off. He appealed because he was a Roman citizen. Like I said, he appealed to Caesar because that was his right. So he gets shipped off, and on his way to Rome, he gets shipwrecked, and he was in Malta for a while, and then like all these just nonstop. But it was really, it really points out to the St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas talks about the problem of evil, that God would only allow evil. It's part of his omnipotence, that God would only allow evil if he can bring a greater good from it. And the evil of the just natural evils of shipwreck, but also imprisonment and torture and all that, brought the gospel to all these different places. Like, would the missionaries have made it to Malta had it not been for a shipwreck? You don't know. But Paul he spread the gospel from one end of the empire to the other, basically. And he was just a terrific missionary.
So it means also that being a missionary, it doesn't mean that you're immune to all of these things. Like, you have to go through them, but you learn from Paul. He's so persistent. I mean, he still says so many positive things. I mean, anybody else would have broken down by then and given up. Gone back home.
Yeah, well, 4 of his epistles were written while in jail in Rome. He wrote 4 of his epistles, and one of the epistles too, the letter to the Philippians, is called the Epistle of Joy, because he keeps saying so much joy and joy. You think, how could he be joyful if you're sitting in a Roman prison? Because I couldn't be joyful in an American jail. And that would be like a Ritz-Carlton compared to a Roman prison 2,000 years ago.
So what else can you learn from him? I mean, a lot of his writings focus a lot on the moral aspects of living. He talks about prayer, he talks about chastity, he talks about building the church, relationships, all of these things. So can you tell us a little, focus a little bit on these small things that he's talking about throughout his writings?
Like, what lessons to learn from Paul, because you can, basically everything we know about Christianity, half of what we know about Christianity is based on Paul. And if I was really to take, from his life, two major lessons, it would be to not let suffering put us off track. We're all going to suffer in different ways. And when Paul at one point even wrote in one of his letters that he had a thorn in the flesh. And we don't know what that was. We don't know if it was a temptation or if it was an illness or what it was, or someone just an irritating person. We don't know. But he asked God to remove it from him. And Jesus told him, my grace is sufficient for you. And so that's really, and all these other things that happened to him. He was shipwrecked. I think he was shipwrecked like 3 times too. And just, he was imprisoned, for a total of 2 years in Caesarea and 2 years in Rome. And all these different things. He was bit by a snake while he was on Malta and just shook it off into the fire. All these things that would have made regular people just quit. Just say, that's it. I've had enough of this. All these things, he didn't let it put him off. He continued through, and he used that suffering. He said he rejoices in the suffering that's building up what's lacking in the body of Christ. And what is lacking is us joining our sufferings to Jesus. Us allowing the things in this world to happen and not putting us off track, basically. And the second thing that I would take from St. Paul's life is that nobody is beyond redemption. Yeah, okay. Because he was, he literally, it says when he was going up to Damascus, he was breathing murder. Yeah. That's how bad did he hate the church, that he was breathing, his very breath was murderous. So if God could take him and change him around, nobody's beyond that. If it's possible for him. And that really, it haunted him all of the rest of his life too, and he never really got over that. Yeah. And that was probably part of his suffering too, because he said in, I think it was in 1 Corinthians, he said he was unfit because he persecuted the church of God, that he was unfit to even be an apostle. Yeah. So it played on his mind, I guess. What was that?
It played on his mind. I mean, even that guilt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that nobody is beyond, because that even he said in Romans that when we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Yeah. And then he also said in 1 Timothy, he said that Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and he said, and I am the foremost of sinners. Yeah. He knew how sinful he was himself for the past, things that he had done in the past. But he also knew that if God can change me, and that's why it's so powerful, so that's probably why God picked him, is because of who he was. But if God could change St. Paul, who murdered saints, he was there, he was complicit in the murder of St. Stephen, the first murder. If you can take him and turn him into the greatest missionary the church has ever known, then anybody can be used for God's purposes if we cooperate with it, if we allow it to happen.
Okay. So those are the 2 things that people can learn. What about his prayer life? I mean, is there something about his prayer life that people can pick up from? Because he always talks about pray without ceasing and all these things about prayer. So is there something that people can get from that as well?
Yeah, I mean, just pray without ceasing. That really is a great prayer tip, I guess you could call it. Because a lot of people think of prayer as just this thing that you do and you got to sit down and, fold your hands in your lap and sit there dead quiet and pray for, 30 seconds or 2 minutes or however long you can stand to be in silence, and that's it. But really, prayer is, who was it that said, he who sings prays twice? You can sing a song, like my favorite's the Gloria at the beginning of Mass. I love the Gloria. But I find myself singing that in the shower all the time. But, I mean, you can sing a song to God as a praise of God, or you can, just as you're doing things throughout the day, just little things. Yeah. Just constant, pray without ceasing. Everything you do, offer it up for the glory of God. Yeah. I really think that is a great tip that Paul gives us.
So all of this material now, tell us what you used. I mean, apart from your biblical sources, what you used to read more about Paul, because there's a lot of division about Paul, especially about the things that he's said in terms of doctrine and otherwise. But overall, if you want to read more about Paul or understand him, are there any books that you would recommend to people so that they can read?
Yeah, that's funny you say a lot of division about Paul. He really is. He's claimed by every branch of, like every different kind of, like Calvinists or Arminians or like anyone claims Paul. Like, oh yeah, he's on our team. So yeah, there is a lot of that going on. There's a book that I didn't get to finish the whole book, but I've thumbed through it a few times. Is St. Paul by Benedict XVI. He's one of my favorite theologians ever.
That's the one I picked. Yeah.
Yeah, that's and then also too. I mean, you just read Acts. I think Paul first shows up in Acts chapter 8 all the way through to like the very last sentence of Acts, 28 chapters of Acts. So that's 20 from 8 to 28. So it's 20 chapters, pretty much mostly about St. Paul. And just the the conversion story of Paul, you can read that over and over again and find all kinds of little different tidbits that you don't even notice, because like the scales that fall off his eyes literally are something that fall off his eyes. So it's a literal, it's figurative because he's he's now seeing Jesus for who he is, but it's also literal. And it reminded me a lot of Tobit in the Old Testament when he peeled the scales off his eyes. Yeah. Yeah, but I would definitely recommend that book, St. Paul by Benedict XVI. I recommend anything written by Benedict XVI, though, so I'm kind of partial.
Yeah, but I think a lot of his views in that book are are more academic, Is there anything else that you would read? I know that there is a book that I know may divide certain people. It's called The Catholic Perspective on St. Paul. So if you want to read why we believe the way we believe in St. Paul that way, then maybe you could pick that book up. But otherwise, if you want to read about him in general, I think this book, St. Paul the Apostle, is just fantastic if you're starting.
Yeah. It's a great place to start.
Yeah.
And like I said, just start in Acts chapter 8. Acts itself is just a terrific...
Yeah.
It's like reading a novel if you read Acts. Just from Acts chapter 1, where the ascension happens, all the way till Paul on trial in Rome. It really is. It's a compelling read.
Yeah. So, anything else that you want to say about St. Paul? We have 4 minutes left. So if you want, you have any highlights or anything else that you personally have learned from his life that you've implemented in your own life, then maybe you could tell us.
Yeah, I think I've covered a lot of it. There's actually a quote here I wrote down from Benedict XVI.
Okay.
And it's, "The Apostle Paul, an outstanding and almost inimitable yet stimulating figure, stands before us as an example of total dedication to the Lord and His Church, as well as a great openness to humanity and all its cultures." I think that's a really great encapsulation of St. Paul.